Quiet on the set.
Hollywood again. All right, there, ladies and gentlemen, this is a call to order the Finance Committee of the Bridgeport Board of Education. The time is now 6 p.m. In attendance, we have committee member Bobby Brown, committee member and Chair Joe Sokolovic. We've got the finance team on team. We've got Ms. Erica Castillo, Albert Benahan, board members. What other board members are on? I can't see everybody.
Mike.
We can't hear you.
Mike Macarone.
Yes.
Who else is there any other board members on right now that I missed?
Albert Benahan, right?
Albert Benahan. I believe that's all. And I believe that's all we have. Let's get right down to business. The first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes dated November 17th, 2021. Do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
I'll second
Is
that.
there any way we could, not have the back of the board members with us?
No, sir.
I'm not going to disrespect anything.
We need this, the slideshow's gonna be up there.
You can't hear because you're talking to the board, not us. That's the issue.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, this is the best we could do.
Oh, it is.
It's gonna be live streaming, and I'm gonna have to ask everybody to be quiet. It'll be a little easier to hear. And this will be the last interruption, or you'll be asked to leave. Okay, now back to business. Is, any amendments to the minutes?
Yes, there should be a change and so there's my name and my name is mentioned twice and not your name. So if that could be corrected.
You got that, Ms. Young? Thank you. Okay, all in favor with corrections?
Aye.
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 All of it. Aye, yeah, pass. Motion pass carries. Sorry.
Right behind his head.
Okay, now, next item on the agenda is the update on the financial condition for the 2021-2022 budget. I believe, Ms. Siegel, you'll be taking that away?
Yes, good evening to everyone. I do not have presenter rights at the moment. I have requested the rights through the chat.
Can somebody give Ms. Siegel rights to present, please?
Just wait a moment. If not, I'll present without putting the information on the screen.
Mr. Testani's working on it.
Thank you. All right, in the interest of time, if everyone's agreeable, I'll begin. I'll speak slowly so that the information is clear.
That's acceptable.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Thank you. In regard to the 2021-22 update, the financial condition report as of December 31st, 2021, was posted in the first week of January. In order to balance the operating budget, we are projecting that a withdrawal of $5 to $6 million from prior year savings on deposit in the Internal Service Fund will be required. As a reminder, the Internal Service Fund currently has on deposit approximately $20 million. And the $20 million consists of $2 million that we've been carrying forward, which is the pre-2018-19 component that's prior to the initiation of the Connecticut Partnership. In addition to that $2 million, at the end of 1920, we added $6.5 million in savings. In 2021, last year, the second year of the pandemic, we were able to add 10.8 million. And in addition, we added over 800,000 from the food and nutrition budget to account for the retiree costs of the food and nutrition employees. So the grand total is approximately $20 million. That information was previously reported to the board at the end of year close for 2021. So once again, from the district reserve, meaning the internal service fund, we have currently 5.6 million that's committed to closing the 21-22 budget gap, the gap for this current year. A withdrawal of 6 million would leave a balance of 14 million for use in 22-23. I want to emphasize that this is a projection. At this time of year, there are still many variables. Projections change, they increase, and they decrease as we move through the year. So the final number in order to balance for the current year in the operating budget may be 5 million, it may be under 5 million, it may be over 5 million, but at this time we are projecting between $5 and $6 million. Now, I want to make a few comments about some significant fiscal factors and implications. In 21-22, the district has experienced continued growth in special education services and an expansion of ELL services for the rising number of English language learners. Special education services encompass the opening of new classes and additional related services such as resource teachers, speech services, and occupational therapy. We are utilizing our grant funds, including the ESO grants, to the optimal extent practical, wherever appropriate and permissible to do so in accordance with guidelines, to conserve limited operating funds and increase rollover capacity. For example, and I have discussed this in the past, but I think it's important to reinforce the concept. There are 9 additional special education resource teacher positions allocated in the current year compared to the prior year, 2021. And those positions have arisen as a result of the COVID pandemic. Therefore, of those positions, it is permissible for us to fund 8 in the ESO grants. And we are doing so. It is a part of our application submitted to the state. We have 4 new kindergarten autism classes known as ASD classes. And those are funded in the 2-year ARP ESO IDEA grant, which is intended solely for special education, as those needs arose due to the pandemic. And we have 5 new ELL positions, which we are funding in the ARP ESO grant as a result of the expanded services required for our English language learners. It's also important to look ahead and understand that at the expiration of these grants, the ESO grants in particular, if the level of need for special education and EL services has not declined, the district will have to continue the services, since the services are mandated, through other resources at an annual cost of approximately $3.5 million. I'm mentioning this because the information is important to understand as we move ahead in the 3-year ESO cycle and as we continue to deal with an underfunded condition in the overall operating budget. And finally, we remain in Deficit prevention mode. This means that we're implementing standard operating practices for stringent cost control and management. We capture accrued funds in all areas and build reserves to support a balanced budget. We leverage our funds across all sources in order to achieve optimal utilization to meet our needs, and we maximize rollover capacity to help close a budget gap. Thank you, and that concludes the report on 21-22.
Okay, I'll open up for questions. Ms. Brown?
No questions at the moment.
Mr. Macaron?
No questions at the moment, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Benahan?
No question at the moment, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Ms. Castillo?
Same, no questions at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, I got one or two questions, just actually for emphasis. Now, you say the Internal Service Fund has a 20 million balance, of which approximately 5 is going to be needed, and also $3.5 million of positions being covered by ESO funds. But for the existence of if we did not have that money, we would basically have a 8.5 million deficit.
Yes, but it's also important to keep in mind that the special ed and L services that I have mentioned have predominantly, not solely, but predominantly arisen from the COVID pandemic. The number of referrals to special education increased as a result of the needs that emerged as a result of the pandemic.
Mr. Kolovic, just to add to that, part of the increase to our special education budget has been relocation of students from out of state that have come to us with IEPs that we are mandated to implement. And to Ms. Siegel's point, we had an increase of our English language learner population from 3,900. We're currently at almost 4,700 since the start of the school year.
So in essence, this is what we mean when we mention the fiscal cliff. When these monies run out, you're getting closer and closer, and these services, if they're still needed, will have to be paid for, and money would have to be taken from somewhere else to pay for it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Let the record reflect, Baptiste Perez has arrived at the meeting. Okay, we just went over, okay, I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the budget request for 2022 and 2023.
All right, thank you. I'm going to put on the screen a PowerPoint. We'll just take a moment. Okay. Okay. All right. You should be able to see on the screen the PowerPoint for the budget request 22-23.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So the PowerPoint consists of 4 parts: the fiscal framework, goals and challenges, an overview of 21-22, the request for 22-23, and an appendix with grant-funded services. Now, our fiscal goals consists of a structurally balanced budget, a school-based budgeting model, fiscal accountability, and comprehensive fiscal management. Our district enrollment has actually declined over a 5-year period from 2016 to 2021 by over 2,000 students. The greatest loss occurred in 2021, last year, 800 students. And in the current year, on October 1, there were 19,049 students, which represented another decline of 281 students. The bottom chart is illustrating our special ed and L populations, and you can see that the special ed numbers and the L numbers continue to grow. Now, NCEP pertains to net current expenditures per pupil. It is a statistic that the Connecticut Department of Education utilizes, and our NCEP as of October 21, as you can see on the chart, was 16,982. For those not familiar with this statistic, it's important to understand that the net current expenditure level includes all fund sources, which would encompass all grants, even if a grant is targeted to a specific school or has a narrow focus. This is actually the first time that Bridgeport exceeded one of our peer districts. You can see that we're actually ahead of Waterbury slightly, but we are far behind Hartford and Stamford, and we continue to trail New Haven. I did include in the documents for this evening the latest comparison with our peer districts in terms of local and state contributions to the primary operating budget. So we are underfunded, and if we were equitably funded with Hartford, our budget would increase by $95 million. I just want to go back for a moment. There are 166 districts in the NCEP report, and when we rank them from highest to lowest, we land at 144, which is in the lowest, I'd say the lowest quartile. Right. Now, NCEP is a relevant factor when we examine special education excess cost, which means if we're sending special education children out of district, we're responsible for paying 4.5 times the NCEP for each placement, plus the cap, the percentage cap of the balance. And that percentage cap, you can see on the chart, has increased from 15-16 through 19-20. It continually grew, which meant that every district had a higher level of expense because they had to pay a higher percentage of the remaining amount after paying 4.5 times the NCEP. Last year, which was a pandemic year, the cap was 16.52%. So that was helpful to us because we had to pay less, so our share was lower. And in the current year, 21-22, we just received the preliminary calculation of the cap, and I'm emphasizing preliminary because it can change between now and the spring. But the preliminary number for this year is 18.02, so hopefully it will not increase when the final numbers are announced in the spring. So 1802 is also a good number compared to 1920 at 29.11%. So that is a positive development that just occurred this afternoon. Okay. So there's an example at the bottom of the chart that indicates if an out-of-district placement has a total cost of $100,000, we have to pay 4.5 times the NCEP, plus the cap. In this example, I used 29.11%, and that left a total district share of 83,283, and then a state excess cost of 16,717. So when we speak about the state excess cost grant, we're speaking about the balance of the cost of an out-of-district placement after the district pays 4.5 times the NCEP plus the cap times the remainder. Now, special education in 2021, last year, based on the education finance system data that was reported to the state and is now audited as of December 31st, showed total sped expenditures of about $90 million, or 26.87% of the total budget. The $90 million was divided between in-district and out-of-district. The out-of-district number on the screen would be net of the state reimbursement. And so the distribution is in-district approximately 69 million, out-of-district approximately 21 million. Now we have a fiscal allocation model that has 4 components. It has a position allocation that utilizes equitable and uniform staffing formulas with consideration for school-specific needs. We have an operating allocation that has a base of $20 per student. We did increase it to $30 per student this year with ESSER funds. We have a teacher's choice allocation. The base is $30 per teacher based on the first payroll in October. We did increase that to $50 per teacher with ESSER funds, and that's allocated to teachers through a school specialty e-card. We also have a parent involvement allocation that is based on the Title I formula, and that is 1% of the Title I appropriation is allocated for parent involvement. And in the current year, that was $9.45 per student. It does require submission of a budget plan approved by the principal and the PAC or PTSO president. We face various fiscal challenges, which could also be called fiscal pressures or variables. And we have to monitor these variables carefully and institute cost controls wherever applicable. The most prominent variables would be utility costs, SPED and L services, which we've mentioned, which you mentioned previously, absence coverage, health benefits and other benefits, transportation, and legal services. This screen presents some examples of cost control management. The first item is the transportation contract, which is actually expiring in June of 22, and we're preparing to issue an RFP for a new contract. But in the prior 3-year agreement, we did negotiate very low inflation rates, 1.06, 1.5, and 1.4%. So that has been helpful in controlling cost. And there are various other items on the chart. The transportation costs in the operating budget for 2021 last year totaled approximately $20.2 million. And we're projecting for the current year of 22.3 million. Keep in mind that last year was a pandemic year. Expenses are rising in the current year in alignment with the pre-pandemic years. So that increase on the screen does not solely reflect the inflationary factor. It also reflects a return to in-person instruction and full use of transportation services. This slide illustrates our core curriculum renewal cycle, and we include this slide in order to emphasize first, the importance of curriculum renewal to our educational program. Second, the magnitude of the expenses involved in keeping the curricular and the educational resources current. And we focus on optimizing our resources to meet our core curriculum and academic objectives. Now we'll move to part 2, and I'll do a brief overview of the budget for 21-22. So the pie graph illustrates the operating budget at the top, supplemented by various grants at the bottom. For those not familiar with this graph that I have presented each year, the bottom section pertaining to grants includes the major grants that constitute part of our comprehensive fiscal plan. So those grants that are listed, for example, on the federal side, Title I, Title IIA, Title III, IDA, on the state side, Priority, Bilingual, and Magnet. These are grants that are part of the comprehensive fiscal plan. They are providing services that are essential to basic operating needs and core objectives. So, for example, in Title I, we're funding special education paraprofessionals. IDEA is a grant allocated by the federal government solely for special education services. And in the current year, 21-22, the state priority grant was reduced by $78,131. The magnet grants for our magnet schools, Discovery Magnet and the Fairchild Wheeler High School campus, that increased by $107,000. But in the magnet grants, we're actually running at a shortfall because we've had escalated costs and insufficient revenue, even with an increase in the current year. Our Title I allocation did increase. It's another important point to keep in mind in regard to Title I is that when we have an increase in Title I, it doesn't solely belong in entirety to the district, because we have to also fund non-public schools. So the non-public schools, based on an equitable formula, are going to receive a share of any additional allocation to the district. Now on this slide, we're examining enrollment trends in special education and in English language instruction for our English language learners. And you can see again that over 5 years, the SPED population has grown by 448 students. This is based on comparing October 1st data. And the L population, 1,298 students. So while our needs are rising, our revenue is actually declining due to reduced overall enrollment. So we have special needs growing, overall enrollment declining. And when overall enrollment declines, it doesn't necessarily mean that classes are declining at the same ratio, because if you have a class of 25 students, if you lose 5 students, you then have a class of 20 students, and you still have to maintain that class. So, class changes have to be examined in light of the total number of classes on the grade, the total number of students on the grade. Sometimes it's possible to consolidate classes, but sometimes it's not. based on the numbers. Yet we have to locate resources to sustain the classes even though revenue declines. So what are the implications? Well, I'd like to remind everyone that in 21-22, we had anticipated the addition to the Alliance ECS grant, which supplements our operating budget, to be 2.3 million, but we only received 1.5 million. And we believe that a factor was the lower enrollment. The state priority grant has declined by 1.9 million over 7 years, $78,131 in the current year. Now our Title I grant has fortunately increased over the last 2 years, and hopefully it will remain stable. However, Title I is tied to October 1st data, and it's usually a year behind. So we're remaining hopeful that that the formulas being used at the federal government will not result in a decline next year. So what's the final conclusion? Our special needs populations, in particular special ed and L, require more intensive services with lower student-staff ratios, and those services have a higher cost factor. Now, this chart is, again, illustrating the increase in the enrollment for special education and English language learners. And the bottom chart identifies specific grants in those two areas, special ed and English language learners. And it illustrates that while there has been some growth in those grants in 21-22, the increases are minimal compared to the actual need. Now, our operating budget is funded by the city, 27.3%, and by the state, 72.7%. And you can see on this chart that in the current year, the city allocated an additional $2 million in operating funds, and the state allocated in alliance funds $1,530,063. Okay. Now, the average percentage growth over 6 years in the total budget includes operating budget plus alliance. When I speak of the operating budget, I always include Alliance ECS. So the average per year, 1.17%. Clearly, that is insufficient to keep pace with escalating costs, even after taking into account our ongoing focused efforts at cost control and management. And you can see within that 1.17%, the city's contribution was 0.59 and the state contribution was 0.58. Now, in regard to the ESO grants, specifically ESO 2 and ARP ESO, they are providing supplemental services. Supplemental means that they're providing services that have arisen due to pandemic-related needs. It's important to know that both of these grants represent a one-time infusion of federal resources. We are not aware that when the ARP ESO grant ends on September 30th of 2024, that there'll be an extension. Of course, everyone would want an extension to be approved, but at this point, there isn't any reason to believe that there will be. ESO 2 is ending 1 year earlier, 9/30/23. ARP ESO 9/30/24. So this screen is illustrating, by example, many of the services that are included. And I emphasize again that these services are supplemental, and without other fund sources, when these grants expire, the services would end. So now we'll move on to part 3, the 22-23 budget request. And once again, we have a pie graph. And this pie graph is illustrating that our projected need for next year is $18 million. We're expecting, at a minimum, another $1.5 million from the state in the Alliance ECS grant. We're requesting from the city $6 million, okay, which is 2.3% of the total requested budget. And we would then have a gap of $10.5 million. Now, I will continue to emphasize, particularly for those who are new to this process, that when we calculate the monetary need, in this case $18 million, we are projecting that every position in our allocation model will be filled, and filled for the entire year. Now, evidently, there are vacancies that occur. Not every vacancy is filled immediately, so there are accrued funds. In addition, we have experienced over the last 3 years and in the current year, 21-22, to a significant extent, shortages of teachers and paraprofessionals and other staff members. The pandemic has caused not only supply chain shortfalls, but labor shortages in most industries, if not all, throughout the United States and globally. This is a phenomenon that is affecting most countries. And so we know that there are going to be vacancies that occur, and I'm going to show you on the slides that follow that we close the gap by taking that into account. But you know, sometimes the question arises, well, why is that number so high? Well, I'm going to show you all the components, and one of the components is the funding required to ensure that all positions could be filled if we had applicants to fill them.
Joe, can I just add one thing?
Oh, yes, one moment, Mr. Siegel. Gotcha. Good night.
So just to make note, that 2.3% increase that's requested from the city is on the low side. On average, if you speak to districts across the area, most budget requests from the municipality is anywhere from 3 to 5% range is pretty normal. And we're asking below that just to try to get somewhere in the ballpark that we need to be. And as you can see, last year we got 2 million. So if we don't continue to at least get to that 2.3% increase, the cliff continues to grow. And unfortunately, everybody in this room and beyond is going to be impacted.
So now on the next slide, we show the various components. And let's look at the first line, collective bargaining. So our collective bargaining agreements total almost $5.2 million alone. Right? Keep in mind that we're moving into the third year of the teacher's contract, and there is step movement in that year. And whenever there's step movement, our annual cost for the growth in teacher salaries is going to be close to $4 million. Now, health insurance, we're projecting at this point a 6% growth trend. We received recently the latest or the early forecast. The consulting firm is projecting 8% initially. We don't think it's going to be 8%. They always project higher at this time of year. So we're using a 6% figure, and that's 3.3%. I'm sorry, 3.3 million. So, I'm using a 6% growth trend figure, which yields 3.3 million in additional expense. MERF. MERF pertains to the retirement fund for non-certified staff. And let's see, I actually have to update this. It's not 21.5, it's going to be 20.2%. So that has to be corrected. It's going up from 19.05 to 20.2. That's our expectation. The dollar amount is correct. It's still about $1 million. Special education, we always include a factor for growth in special ed costs. We're anticipating, as I mentioned earlier, a new transportation contract starting July 1st. And we're just making a projection. Obviously, we don't know what the final inflationary factor will be based on a new contract, but we have to make a projection. So I'm projecting 3.5% at 700,000. Hopefully it will be less. Now, we also have to compensate for the money that we are most likely to withdraw from the internal service fund that will not replenish itself. And I've divided those funds into two parts. I mentioned the $5 to $6 million figure earlier. For the purpose of the budget request, I'm using $6 million. It's always better to project higher and reduce at a later point than it is to project lower and have to increase. So I mentioned 6. I just divided that into the two parts, the 2 million from the pre-18-19 surplus and 4 million that was deposited from the prior year, from the following year. And then there is the vacancy fill factor that I explained a few minutes ago, and that is the dollar amount that we need to annualize new hires who may not have been hired for a full year, who we hope will be able to work a full year in the new school year, and to fill carried over vacancies. So we're projecting at this point that would be about $2 million. And then we have a small reserve. And we always project about $1.5 million for turnover savings. Turnover savings result when an employee retires and is replaced by a new employee at an entry-level salary. So those are the components that are contributing to $18 million. Now, we looked on the prior slide at the collective bargaining cost of approximately $5.2 million, and that is broken out across the various personnel categories. And you can see that our teachers require a collective bargaining amount of over $4 million, which I mentioned previously. All right. Now, in regard to the city appropriation, we are requesting $6 million. Why did we select $6 million? Superintendent alluded to this a few minutes ago. It's 2.3% of the total budget, 8.45% of the city share. We selected the $6 million because if we go back again, we can see the $5.2 million figure for collective bargaining, and we also have health insurance growing by 3.3 million. So we decided we're not going to ask them for $8 million although that would certainly be justified, we decided on $6 million, and that is reasonable, entirely reasonable, because it is contributing partially, not fully, partially, to non-discretionary costs, specifically salary growth and a portion of health insurance and MRF growth. So if they allocated the $6 million, that would be 2.3% of the total budget, and that would equate to average growth in the city share to about 0.8% per year. So the city would have been contributing in terms of the growth in the budget, 0.8% per year. All right, so how are we closing the gap? So we mentioned that we're expecting a minimum of $1.5 million from the state as the Alliance ECS addition, and from the city, we're requesting $6 million. We remain hopeful that the city will allocate $6 million. And in order to close the gap, we would have to withdraw $7.5 million from the Internal Service Fund, from the savings that I mentioned earlier. And we would apply grant revenue, such as Title I, to eligible services in compliance with grant guidelines, pending confirmation, of course, of the 22-23 appropriation. And then we would have at least $2 million in GAAP resolution strategies. That would include deficit prevention mode and other strategies to generate savings. What do we mean by GAAP resolution strategies? Well, those strategies would include position consolidation and alignment with register projections. I noted earlier that we have experienced a decline in overall enrollment, which does not necessarily equate to a decline in classes. However, in a few schools, we have identified very low numbers in certain grades for next year, and it is likely that there will be a class reduction. But I want to emphasize it's a very low number of schools. There could be position conversions after attrition. For example, we have been converting 12-month AP vacancies when they occur to 10-month AP positions with savings. There could be some other adjustments that we identify to generate savings while enhancing effectiveness and operational efficiency. For curriculum and technology renewal, we are utilizing our grants in lieu of funds traditionally allocated in the operating budget. In particular, in the current 3-year cycle, we are utilizing ESSER funds to a large extent. It's not the sole source of funding for curriculum and technology renewal, but it is a major source. And we're continuing in deficit prevention mode with position control, procurement control, and internal controls. And as I mentioned earlier, when positions can't be filled, we utilize substitutes, and the cost of the substitute is lower than the cost of an annual employee. That is only done when it's not possible to fill the position with a qualified, properly certified individual. So this screen further illustrates position control, procurement control, and internal controls, which are the 3 components of deficit prevention mode. Now, what does our operating budget fund? Why do we continually discuss the underfunded nature of the operating resources. In our operating structure is very streamlined. In our district office, at the time that this slide was crafted, there were 101 full-time employees in a district of over 19,000 students, with a high needs population in the areas of special education and English language learning. This graph is illustrating the components of the operating budget based on the standard chart of accounts. So the 5 budget categories that are listed, those are categories that are set up in Munis. They have not changed in all the years that I've been in the district. So we use those standard categories. And if you want more information on those categories, I would refer you to the posted reports. The financial condition report illustrates all of the components in each of these categories. But the chart at the top of the screen illustrates the highest percentage being dedicated, of course, to instruction. Over close to 69.8% for instruction. That is instructional support, so that's 70%, and student support. So 77% for instruction, 0.9% for administration, and administrative support 22.3%. And when we move on, we can see that the administrative support consists of all of the back office functions that are necessary to maintain a strong infrastructure for support of our school operations, business, facilities, human resources, payroll, pupil services, security, transportation, technology, and student data. So in total, $62.3 million. What are the major contributants? Facilities, 42.7%, transportation, 36.6%, and security, 8.9%. Also, benefits. And now when we think of benefits, we think of health insurance. Well, that is a primary contributant. But we also have Social Security and MRF and unemployment and workers' comp. And all of those components are shown on the screen. And those components combined for both active employees and retirees, health insurance for retirees, that's $64.7 million. And finally, this is a summary screen illustrating our monetary need, our essential need for the new year. And that's 18 million. The city share, the request is 6 million. The state request is a minimum of 1.5. Hopefully it will be higher, but 1.5 is equivalent to the current year number. And the balance of the screen indicates the key data elements that we've discussed in this session. Part 4, I'm not going to take time to review. It is an appendix for you to read at your leisure, and it has a summary of grant funding comparisons from the prior year to the current year, as well as a chart for each of the major grants with a listing of the key services that are funded in the grant. I'm just going to slide through before concluding the presentation. Our presentation has concluded. Thank you very much.
Okay, questions? Ms. Baptiste first.
The first question I have is pertaining to, I understand the amount that we're asking from the city, but why aren't we presenting the realistic amount and a comparable amount compared to other districts? We're kind of shortballing ourselves in the negotiation process if we're already underestimating what we need. And what would be the actual figure? Because I only heard a ballpark range of about 5%. If 6 million isn't the amount that the schools need, how much do we really need so we can present that number to the city? Because when the city's making decisions regarding tax abatements on businesses, we need to understand and advocate early that that money could be used for the schools and other municipal fields. So I really want to get an understanding of how much is needed, what percent is that, so we can actually begin the advocacy process a lot earlier.
I think just to maintain salary and benefits, you're looking at $8.3 to $8.5 million ask. Now we can start there. It's really not a negotiation. You can see historically, we're either giving nothing or flat funded or given a few dollars to show that there is some good faith, but the realistic number of $8.5 million would be a great ask, and that's the ask that we can make, and that's the decision that we're here for. And then just prepare for what's going to be given to us, because it's not really a negotiation where it's a back and forth and a dialogue. I hope that when the time comes that we can get as much support around the budget that we can as we hear tonight. But as you can see, we added some extra slides this year. 31 and 32 are new to the budget presentation, because I think it's important for people to realize, not just here, but on the city side, that there are costs that are continue growing that we don't have control over, and they contribute to loss of services and support for students and for our teachers. So, and other staff members when it comes to collective bargaining negotiations. It's unfortunate, but there are a lot of hands in the pot when we go to the city. And for some reason, that education has not become a priority in over a decade here in Bridgeport. That comes to funding, and all indications from commentary that's been made to me when I've broached the situation over the last several weeks is that you have plenty of money from the federal government. And unfortunately, that attitude is going to result in little to no increase to our budget, which will contribute deeper to what we're going to face in 2 to 3 years. It will be an emergency situation. The crisis is real. It's unfortunate that we have to count on teacher vacancies that can't be filled in order to balance a budget. But unfortunately, unless we get a collective group, everyone together and loud, this is going to continue to happen. And if we don't do something about it soon, again, it will impact the entire school community, not just children, but every employee here, because as we have seen throughout the pandemic, more and more is being placed on less and less individuals. And I can't ask our staff to do any more than they're already doing. It's unfair to them. And at some point, there's going to be a breaking point. And unfortunately, we have to open up 37 schools next year, and we need to open them up fully staffed with people that want to be here, also deserve to be compensated for the work they do, for the demands that are placed upon them. I agree with you, Ms. Baptiste Perez. We need to go all in, and we need to demand at least $8.5 million from the city of Bridgeport.
Before you continue, would you like to make a motion to amend the document to reflect $8.5 million?
Motion to amend the document to request $8.5 million from the city of Bridgeport.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I have a question, Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't think Ms. Baptiste Perez was
Oh,
finished.
okay. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Oh, I just had a comment. I ran this year, and a lot of people that I ran with talked about the budget and education in Bridgeport. If they can't hold up to what they promised as far as funding the schools, then we need to, as a board, hold them accountable, because that's realistically what we need. And if we're not going to be realistic up front to what's necessary, then all of that is just political play for, oh, I care about the schools. If you care about the schools would be adequately funded, business decisions from higher up be done with a notice of the increase in costs amongst the city.
Absolutely.
So I
Very good.
don't think being realistic of what we need and being upfront very early, because what it seems is that also, ironically, is with the ESSER funds, they're also going to be used up in 2 years. And you know what's in 2 years? An election.
Correct.
And if we know that this fiscal cliff that we're climbing on is about to fall off, and fall off on is going to be a problem, we need to start holding them accountable now
Agree.
and keep it on the record and keep it pushing forward that this is what our schools need. These are the resources that we need to keep our classrooms going, to keep programs for our children, and not underplay it. Because when the time comes, the record won't lie, that at least we put our best foot forward and the whole story forward as to what is needed for the budget for the schools.
I'm going to go to Ms. Brown next and then Mr. Macaron.
So I know that Ms. Siegel mentioned that there's a need for vacancies and fill to hire. I'm wondering, that's not coming out of the SR funding, right? Or that's something that the district has to fill as far as finance wise?
I was referring to teacher vacancies. For example,
Okay.
there could be an elementary teacher position, perhaps because a teacher recently resigned.
Mm-hmm.
And the school may not be able to fill it immediately, so they'll request a substitute to cover that position. It may or may not be possible to find a certified teacher to fill that position in the current school year. If the position remains covered by the substitute, the cost to the district will be lower than the cost the district would incur if a certified teacher were to be hired to fill the position. Now, our goal is to find a certified teacher to fill the position.
Correct. Is there a certain number of substitutes we currently have right now?
It varies day to day on the fill rate based on the number of folks. We have building subs that are assigned, but then the fill rate is based on those subs who decide to choose, and they get to pick and choose the jobs they would accept. So there are schools that have a much more difficult time attracting subs. Marlene and I met with Kelly Services last week. They have done some surveys of their staff. There are various reasons given for why they select certain jobs over others, but we have increased our sub pay, our daily sub rate. We're almost one of the highest in the state, and it's still problematic. But as we talk to other districts, they're finding similar issues. They just don't have the magnitude of people in the district. I spoke yesterday with the superintendent in New Haven and in Waterbury, and we have currently 72 teacher vacancies as of yesterday, which seems like a lot. They are in even worse shape than we are in. Not that it's any consolation, because it really doesn't matter. But this is going to be a growing trend. The state has projected, because we asked last week to get a number of roughly how many retirements are expected or could be anticipated throughout the state, because that will dictate our staffing issues, how they may increase based on that number. Surprisingly, the pandemic last year didn't add too much to the retirements. It actually dipped from the year before, but it's still around 1,500 on average, roughly, give or take, based on the last 7 years. If that number holds true, and we have 72 current vacancies, you can anticipate that the strain on the district's going to increase. If that number jumps, which according to certain surveys that have been done, I mean, we could see that number grow. they're anticipating, there was a recent article in Forbes magazine that said there could be 34% of the teachers in the nation either retiring or leaving the profession altogether. So.
Because my concern is, you know, and this is no disrespect to substitutes because we appreciate all the work that they do, but the steadiness for students is going to be very difficult, especially with subjects, you know, I don't know, Mr. Planis may, you know, agree or disagree. I know he's not here, but mathematics, a subject that requires a steady teacher to be in the classroom all the time. And if mathematics is affected by substitutes, imagine what our students are, you know, learning or retaining at that time. So I'm extremely concerned about that. And then another question I had, Ms. Siegel, was from the SR funding at the top, when you mentioned that these particular positions or example positions, I'm sorry, let me find the page, that could be funded by the grant. None of those are teacher positions, correct?
There are teacher positions that we are funding in the ESO grants. I mentioned in particular 8 special education resource teacher positions. Since the need for those positions arose as a result of the pandemic, we are permitted to fund those new positions. In other words, they were not prior positions that existed. They were brand new positions. We are permitted to fund those brand new positions in the ESSER grant. So those are teacher positions in the ESSER grant for critical services.
Okay. So I guess what my other concern is that what are we going to do? So I see, like, for example, Director of Early Childhood Education, and you mentioned a few substitute, these are just examples, but my concern is when that grant money runs out, are we looking to disperse these individuals into other positions within the district? How does that work?
No one will lose a job.
Okay, that was my concern.
We will never, that wouldn't happen simply through the absorption into other positions. And we have a plan, especially for the newly funded EASY. There are elementary extra teachers at each building. So over the next couple of years, we'll slowly start to pull back on the number of those and absorb them into openings, that no one is left without a position at the end of the grant.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's my last question.
Okay, Mr. Macaron?
Hello, everyone. My question is very simple. Being a numbers guy, I just need to know if the city of Bridgeport is if we're looking for 2.3%, Marlene? Ms. Siegel?
Slightly higher.
I think 4.5.
A little higher. Okay.
2.3% was corresponding to the $6 million request. We're going to modify the request to $8.5 million, which will raise.
Yeah, but my question is, how is the city? How does our city match up with other cities in the state?
At all.
I'm sorry?
So I included in the board's packet the comparison with the peer districts. I
Okay.
also have a link in the PowerPoint, which I'm going to locate now. And I believe, let's see. Slideshow. All right, I have it here. It's all right. Can you see?
Yes, I can.
All right, I'm going to enlarge it.
The link's not.
So we are at 144 out of 166, correct?
Yes. Can you see the comparison with the peer districts
I
on the
certainly
screen?
can. Yep, I can.
Yes,
But
all right, thank you.
My question is though,
Yes,
do we know other cities, what they're requesting? Do we know other districts, what their percentage request is for their total budget related to the city of Bridgeport. We're saying 2.3%. I mean, is Hartford asking for 5 or 6, and they're getting it in New Haven?
Wouldn't be in the same category.
I could get you that information on what those folks are asking for this year. But
Yeah.
the percentage of the total budget, that's the municipality contribution in those cities is much higher than
Absolutely.
Bridgeport's contribution
Okay, so,
to begin with.
well, does our city know that? Do our
Of
city?
course, they know
They
that.
know. They know.
They know that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
They
Sorry,
are aware.
I'm just trying to,
And you can see
Oh, you're new,
Hartford,
you're new.
I'm sorry. The city of Hartford contributes 31.1%.
oh my God.
I mean, Stanford contributes 95.2%. Waterbury is 41.3%.
Oh my goodness.
And Mr. Macaron, right, let me add to that, Mr. Macaron. The
Yes,
city
sir.
of Bridgeport, up until this year, has funded the lowest in the entire state amount per pupil in the entire state of Connecticut. That was up till this year. This year might have to be another recalculation because we may actually come in second. So we'll be the second from the bottom.
Wow, that's pretty embarrassing.
We even surpassed Waterbury. Yeah.
Is that all your questions, Mr. Macaron? You got something else?
No, I'm done.
Mr. Benan?
Yes, I have a question for Ms. Siegel, and I will tell you, it's 3 questions, Ms. Siegel, and then you can make it very short. I don't want to take too long, your answer. One of them is, well, the special need is full cover for the whole year, because sometime when a special need department needs something, or needs school, or any staff, they always say, oh, we're short of money, we don't have this and we don't have that. So I know I'm reading your budget and all your information. I just want to know the special need department, it will be covered. Second, you talk about the PAC and PTSO budget. And I heard everything was on my way over here, that if the PAC and the PTSO for each school, they don't use the money, the whole money, they can save it for the next year, or they're going to lose that money. And the third one, it was,
Okay,
how much
could we
money
do one at a time, Mr. Menahan, because I'm
All
not
right,
going
the
to
first
remember
one
all
is
the
about the
questions.
special,
So,
the first one is special need.
right, so the special ed, does your question pertain to the special ed department or individual schools?
The budget, I'm calling the special need department, the whole thing.
Yeah, so when there is a need in the area of special ed, we fund the need. I'm not aware of any issues.
All right, thank you. And the second question about the PAC and PTSL budget, when they don't use the whole money, the school, each leader, what's going on with the rest of the money? They're going to lose it, or they're going to put it for the next year?
Right. So the policy has not changed. The same policy has been in place for all of these years. And the policy is that the schools receive a parent involvement allocation, just as they receive an operating allocation at the start of the year. They are told that there is a close date for submission of orders for non-personnel services. They must adhere to that date. As of June 30th, any funds unexpended are lost to the school. We had agreed with the board, I believe 2 years ago, that any unused funds at the elementary level, because the elementary schools are funded by Title I, which allows for rollover, that at the elementary level, any unused funds would be rolled over by the district in the Title I budget within the rollable amount for use for parent involvement activities at the district level during the course of the year. So I believe last year the schools did quite well. I believe there was only about $2,000 remaining, so we did roll that over, and we have that on account from last year in the budget. We also have about $18,000 from the prior year that we're continuing to carry forward for use if it is determined that there are district needs for parent involvement activities. And when I refer to parent involvement activities, I'm referring to activities in addition to the parent convention. For the parent convention, We have for this year a grand total of 27,000, which is 9,000 for this year, plus 9,000 from the prior year that wasn't used, plus 9,000 from the year before that wasn't used. So we have 3 years of allocations totaling $27,000.
Thank you. And the last question is, how much money we need to be sure our Bristol schools cover with your budget? Are we sure how much money we short and how much money we need?
I'm sorry, I missed part of the question. How much money do we need to
How much
ensure-
money, I'm going to repeat the question. How much money do we need and how much money how much money we need to cover our Bristol school?
Well, in the presentation, we indicated that the monetary need, meaning the additional amount for next year, is projected at $18 million.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Siegel.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'll go with,
Question with the chair. Thank you.
okay, I'll go to Ms. Castillo next.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I have no questions, or I feel that a lot of what I was wondering about has already been answered, but I just wanted to take a moment to commend my colleagues for their contributions tonight. I think that this is a very good board, and I'm proud of my colleagues. That's all I'd like to say.
Do I have anybody else, any other board members online that I'm missing?
No, that's it.
Okay, so, yeah, I got a couple of, just comments and, questions. No, just really comments. When we look for savings, we're always in budget deficit prevention mode. And it's really hard. And part of this, we depend on our more experienced teachers retiring and saving money by hiring less experienced class teachers, and we depend on substitute teachers filling classes. And parts that we didn't cover, if a teacher, say, retires or leaves in March, that class is uncovered unless it's a hard to recruit area. So that class after March would all automatically have substitutes every single day from March, April, May, June, and June. And it's a sad state of affairs. And can't point out enough that the city of Bridgeport contributes the least amount per pupil. I mean, we got this excuse after excuse that we're not a very rich city. Waterbury's not a very rich city, and they've consistently given thousands of dollars more. They get less money from the state than we do, yet their per pupil expenditures normally exceed ours by a landslide, and it's crazy. We really need to turn around. And when we talk about consolidating classrooms, you consolidate enough classrooms, you end up closing a school. You end up closing a school, you end up laying off staff. And this is the future we're facing. That's currently, the deficit right now is invisible, it's structural. And we're coming to a reckoning in the next 2 years when ESSER funding runs out and everything becomes clear. The fiscal cliff's going to be there. The people we put in office are going to say, wasn't us, we didn't know. Nobody told us. But yes, you know, you're on notice. We're coming, it's coming. It scares the heck out of me. I don't see the emphasis being put on it that it needs to be by any of our state, local elected officials, and any of our, even some of our advocates are behind. I mean, we get a whole bunch of people coming out to meetings when something directly affects them, when it's at the point that it's affecting them. When we look at this budget in the future, when that cliff comes, it's going to be too late to fill these rooms. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mr. Sokolovic, I just wanted to mention that I do need to spend a few minutes presenting the food and nutrition budget, which the board is required to approve.
Absolutely, go right ahead.
Thank you.
Yes, Anna's back. Okay.
I'm just taking a few moments to put it on the screen. All right. So you should be able to see the food and nutrition budget plan for
Oh.
2022-23. I want to emphasize at the outset that when we present a budget plan for food and nutrition, it's essential to recognize that food and nutrition services is funded solely, fully by federal and state funding. And so we spend up to the level of the state and federal grant combined. In order to set up a budget in Munis, which is the budgeting system, we have to specify to the city a number. It's simply a number. It doesn't represent actual dollars. It's a number that we need so that a budget can be established. So if that number is 22 million and we receive revenue of 20 million, we're only going to spend up to $20 million. And we monitor that budget carefully and regularly, and we put the amount of unrealized revenue on a separate line so that we can track it regularly. So for 22-23, I first want to emphasize that when we actually have to look at 21-22 first, and in 21-22, that's the current year, we have received 2 special allocations, which we think are one-time allocations, meaning we're not anticipating those allocations to be continued in next year, but it would be certainly a positive development if they were. And those 2 allocations you can see on the screen were $1,555,430, known as Federal Emergency Meal Reimbursement Aid, and $38,033 for pandemic local level cost. So a grand total of about $1.6 million. So in 21-22, you can see that the budget number, not the revenue number, with those 2 grants was over $22 million. We are projecting revenue at this time of year, and projections change, they increase and they can decrease, but this time of year we're projecting approximately $19.3 million, inclusive of the revenue we received from those 2 grants that I mentioned, those grants that we think are one-time grants. So our projected revenue without those 2 grants is about $17.7 million, this number that I'm clicking on at the moment. And the original number in Munis was $20,431,353. Again, not revenue, just a number, right? So for next year, we're asking for the number of 22 million. Again, that is not actual dollars. It's not actual revenue. It's just a number that enables us to set up a budget in Munis. We always want that number to be higher than the actual revenue so that we can easily set up the budget. And what's interesting to note is if we look at the projected revenue currently without those 2 grants, it's about 17.7. Now, the federal government each year usually increases the per capita meal reimbursement by an inflationary factor. It might be 2%, might be 2.8%, or higher. So our revenue could grow by close to $1 million. So if the projected revenue without those 2 grants is 17.7, for next year we might achieve 18.7 or 19 million. So if that happens, we're well within the number that's allowing us to set up the budget. And again, we would only spend up to the level of the actual revenue. If those 2 grants are allocated again at the same level or a lower level, we still have room within that 19 million figure that I mentioned to schedule our funds without exceeding the budget number. So I share these details with you to illustrate how we decide on the number. And I continue to reiterate and reinforce that that number does not necessarily represent actual revenue. It's just a number that enables us to set up the budget. And so the initial budget plan takes into account that we may not achieve 22 million in revenue, even though that's the number that we need to set up the budget. And so the initial plan at this time, which is several months before the new year, would have projected unrealized revenue at around 2.8 million on this red line. All right. So the bottom section shows projected expenditures line by line to equal the grand total. Minimum wage is going to increase by $1 to $14 on July 1st of 2022. There are contractual increases as well. And so the projections for earned pay will include the salary changes. We also charge indirect costs at the standard indirect cost rate to the budget. Indirect cost pertains to the administrative services and which would include custodial services as well as back office services that are utilized in order to manage the operational structure and the operational services in the nutrition center. And that is usually between $850,000 and $900,000. And we include those funds initially on the pay line, but those funds will be on multiple lines. So that's by way of explanation as to why the number is significantly higher than prior years. The top section has projected revenue in the various categories, and the bottom section projected expenditures. We will be entering in early February on the date set by the city, the number for the food and nutrition budget, as well as the number approved by the board for the requested increase in the city share to the operating budget. Are there any questions?
Ms. Brown?
No questions.
Ms. Baptiste first.
No question.
Mr. Banayan?
No question, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Castillo?
I just want to note, I believe this was on the agenda item, Albert, for our meeting tomorrow. So we'll discuss tomorrow, but I just wanted to make that point so that we either don't have to discuss it tomorrow or what have you. But anyhow, that was all. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Macaron?
No questions.
And I believe that's everybody. I have no questions myself. So I think at this point, I'll motion to move this budget along to the full board with the revisions noted previously.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Testani, can you see that it gets on the agenda, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And next item up is update on ESSER funding, I believe.
It is the update, yeah, of the ESSER funding.
Yes, Ms. Siegel, an update on the ESSER funding, please.
Yes, so I put on the screen my notes. I'll just take a minute or two to share with the board the status on ESSER funding. So we have 3 grants. The ESSER 1 grant known as
I'm sorry, Ms. Siegel, one moment, please. Yes, what's your point, Ms. Baptiste first?
can she adjust the screen so it can actually be legible from far? Like I can't read what's on.
Neither.
Yeah, can you pinch out Ms. Siegel so we can see,
So,
I'm going to see if I can, yes, I'm going to try and zoom it. Is that better?
No.
a little bit more.
Miss Siegel, in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a slider for zooming in and out. Do you see it?
Yeah, I'm doing it from the Zoom screen.
Okay, I mean that you could do it that way too.
Yes, it's either way works. Yes, absolutely.
There you go. Thank you.
there you go.
Is
I
that
think
better?
we can see that. Yes,
Yes.
very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the ESSER 1 grant was known as CARES, and that's expiring soon, September 30th of 22. We had an appropriation about 8.7 million that was net of the non-public school allocation. We carried forward into the current year about 1.4 million. Currently, we have about 2 million remaining. I'm sorry, 200,000. Sorry, $200,000 remaining, and that's encumbered for the Teacher's Choice in the current year. I had mentioned earlier that the base rate is $30, and we increased it to $50, so there's an extra $20 per teacher. But in addition to that, we had a bonus allocation for unused personal days in May and June. So we're using the balance in the CARES grant to fund the Teacher's Choice allocation. And we are awaiting full use of those funds. And so the budget will be closed. We're hoping it'll be closed by June, but certainly it'll be closed by September 30th of 2022. ESSER 2 continues until September 30th of 23. The Bridgeport allocation is 44.6 million. Starting with ESSER 2, there isn't any non-public school component. The non-public schools, we understand, received allocations directly from the state. So our number is 44.6. And we're projecting at this time that we're going to expend between 20 and 23 million. It may even be higher depending on the outcome of the next topic. And we are on track to expend all of the funds based on our plan by the end of the grant period. ESSER 3 is known as ARP ESSER, and that will expire September 30th of 24. Bridgeport has 100.3 million. Over 20% of that allocation is dedicated to learning recovery. In the current year, we're projecting about 28 million. I want to emphasize, as I do continually, that projections are estimates and they can change. But this is the number today. It could be 29 million tomorrow. For 22-23, we're projecting about 31 million, and in the final year, the balance. And again, those numbers will vary. In conclusion, the district is on track to expend all funds by the end of the grant period, according to the budget plan. Thank you.
I'll start off with a question. What these projections, these are like already planned expenditures that we submitted to the state, what we're going to spend money on with the ESSER 3 funding?
This is based on expenditures to date, which would include personnel payments, as well as non-personnel expenditures. So expenditures for technology renewal, as an example, expenditures for curriculum renewal, as another example, expenditures for the youth service programs that are being contracted as a result of the RFP that was issued by the city. The approval that the board gave for the Tech Truck program, which is over $7 million over 3 years, as well as multiple other services. that are already encumbered and or expended are included in the projection. Now, beyond actual expenditures to date, we then project the expenditures from this point through June. What does that include? It's going to include the projected cost of personnel in the grants, such as social workers, guidance counselors, the elementary academic support instructors. So it's going to include
No device connected.
the expenditures for the personnel in the grant, as well as expenditures that we are anticipating that are in the plan, but for which orders have not yet been submitted, but will be submitted.
Mrs. Baptiste Burns?
Ms. Siegel, just to clarify, if we were to keep everything as is with the ESO grants, and so that's 1, 2, and 3, we're expected to be on track to utilize all the funds in a timely manner, correct?
Yes.
No further questions.
Ms. Brown?
No questions.
Mr. Bennett?
No question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Macaron?
No questions.
Ms. Castillo?
No questions. Thank you.
So I think that brings us to our next item on the agenda. Let me bring up my agenda again. Language.
Discussion and possible action regarding redirect funds from plan programming to pay supplement direct employee. I don't know how to read the whole
Okay,
thing.
now I'll read it. Just discussion and possible action regarding redirecting funds from plan programming to pay supplemental district employee compensation related to work performed during COVID-19 pandemic. I was very I'm going to start off by this little soliloquy. I was very intentional about the way I worded this document, because this is the redirection of funds that is already planned for. This agenda item has come about. The city started discussions approximately 4 months ago, I believe. It was about 4 months ago, give or take, with their bargaining units, which there's some crossover between their bargaining units that are employees of the school system and this. So we just got involved in these discussions last month or so. It's about 30 days, give or take. And this is the first we're hearing of it. And now the city's indicated that they're going to give it before we even entered into the discussions. And now we're thrown for a loop. I'm not saying whether we should or should not, but these are real dollars. It's not monopoly money. It can only be spent once. If it's taken from one place, if it's given to one place, it's got to be taken from another place. So I just want everybody to be on the same page and have the proper facts of the situation before we make a decision. Of course, benefit analysis. This is not a matter of deservability. Our staff works very hard. I understand working through a pandemic. I worked through an entire pandemic. I never had a chance to work from home. I went to work in transportation every single day during the pandemic. I escaped most of the pandemic without catching COVID. 1 month from retirement, I turned up positive from work. So I understand the pain. I understand the suffering. This is not about not deserving it. This is a matter of how to best expend the limited funds, because we've got the funds here, and now we could go into the discussion. I think, Mike, would you like to pick it up?
Yeah, so we've been having some conversations. I think that obviously there's certain requirements and parameters that we would put in place to see who would be eligible to receive the funds and what that would look like. My recommendation tonight is to allocate a dollar amount from our ESSER allocation of money that we will put aside, whether we hit that mark or not based on the final determinations, but at least there's a bucket of money there that we will pull from. We will not exceed that dollar amount. And, there has been some other conversations that have come, and I think with that, we're in a good place. And everyone that put their lives on the line for our students and our families should receive a benefit as a token of our appreciation. So my ask tonight and my recommendation to the board is to set aside $2.4 million of our ESSER funds that can be allocated to provide what we would call premium, hero pay, whatever terminology you'd like to use for folks. There will be a time frame that we will utilize for folks that were here during that time frame. This will not be for folks that are outside of that time frame, who left, who took, for example, a leave of absence, but we're are still on our employee list. So I think those things can be ironed out in turn, because it needs to be per the premium pay, reasonable and necessary, consistent with the funding. It also needs to have some sort of policies and requirements. I think those things can be hashed out. But right now, I think a $2.4 million allocation will be sufficient enough to operate going forward.
And what employees are we talking about covering?
Well, my conversations in recent days, because of our collaboration throughout the educational and process with the city RFP, they are willing to assist by taking on the two non-certified unions, AFSCME and NAGE, their employees, as part of the budget, simply because they did enter in and start those negotiation processes. So their funding will then support that. And we will sit down with the Bridgeport Education Association and the Bridgeport Council of Administrators and Supervisors to hash out those folks out of that 2.4 million.
Ms. Siegel, could you scroll down a little bit, please? Just bring up F and completion, please.
Yes.
I would like to just read that for a second. Incentive compensation to employees based on cost reduction, efficient performance, suggestion award, safety is allowable, that the overall compensation is determined to be reasonable and such costs are accrued pursuant to an agreement entered in good faith between the non-federal entity and employees before the services were rendered, or pursuant to an established plan followed by the non-federal entity, so consistently as to imply in effect an agreement to make such payments. Now, we don't bargain with NAGE. So we can't even enter into agreement with NAGE because they're not our bargaining unit.
Correct. That's why it was determined and agreed upon that the city would continue and they would fund that.
Right. And so our discussions are just going to be with the teachers, and there's going to be a pot of money. I mean, I apologize to the staff that
the two bargaining units that we negotiate their contracts, we will, that 2.4 million will be set aside whether we hit that mark or not based on the parameters that are set forth, but it will not exceed that. And from our discussions, that should be plenty of money to, I would say, reward them for a job well done.
And if there's any excess, say X amount of employees don't qualify, and then there's like a $200,000 balance.
That will go back into the ESSER plan towards services that we're providing for students and other costs.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So with this 2.4, where is it coming from? Like, okay, so is it already allocated for in the budget already? And then we're just pulling it from there? Where is it coming from? Specifically, if it's not already calculated in the budget?
Yeah. We would be redirecting funds that we have on reserve in the ESSER plan for curriculum and or technology or facilities. In other words, funds that are committed to a global purpose, but are not yet committed to a specific use. Superintendent and I believe that we have sufficient funds to redeploy to this objective without impact on our other goals.
The reason why I asked this is because the question is going to come up where did it come from, and did it come from anything that involved directly to our students? So I just wanted it to be clear as to.
But here's the rub, Ms. Brown. I'll answer that.
Okay.
This money can be spent on adding 2 more psychologists. This money can be spent on improving some extra facilities, ventilation perhaps. So these are possible things that can be spent on other than this. Now we got to decide whether there is a benefit to the staff, a benefit to the district by allocating this money for staff in the form of goodwill and recognition of their service. And that does have a value as well. But to be realistic, these other things have value as well. So what we got to do is balance which we think is more bang for our buck.
All right, and this, for the record, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, award our teachers. I just want to make it clear because that's going to be down the road. They're going to be saying, well, what did we take it from? And they're always saying that we don't spend our money correctly. And, I just want that to be clear for the record.
Ms.
No, I'm done.
Okay, Ms. Baptiste first.
Ms. Siegel, I'm just trying to clarify because on the last slide I asked the question that based on our current plan, we had enough to expend everything in a timely manner. Now we're reallocating 2.4. And if I look at the initial intention of the CARES Act, if I look at all the additional coronavirus relief acts, we're going all the way down to F. We've skipped in the legislative intent A, B, C, D, E, F, just to get down to F. And my concern is for A, B, C, D, E.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear on what you're referring to.
Well, no, my concern is, and it's just a general comment, is that the legislative intent of an act is normally codified in order of importance, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. And I think whatever decision that we make, we have to think about the future of the school. And I do have a question for Mr. Testani. Like, what is the plan? It was mentioned a few times, like the plan, the 2.4. How is that really going to be allocated? Because it's not clear to me. Like, I'm confused on what's the plan. And I'm concerned because you're saying it could be taken from the curriculum. It could be taken from here. If we have a plan to spend it already, where are we getting the 2? It still goes back to Bobby's question. Where are we taking the 2.4 from? And we're skipping a whole bunch of stuff from the legislative intent. So are we going to make sure we actually hit our goals?
Well, we're not skipping anything from legislative intent.
No, this was just from, the F directly answers a frequently asked question if you can use this for premium pay. And this is F that helps reference how it can be used. Will it be taken? It'll be taken a little bit from everywhere. Will it have huge impact? I mean, there may be, for example, I foresee that we will save money on PPE going forward. I'm assuming that we're not going to have to provide the level of masks for, right now we don't have to buy staff masks going forward since we are being provided with masks tomorrow from the state. I'm hopeful, and it sounds to me like we probably will not need to buy masks next school year for students. I mean, this is a large contribution. We've already purchased plexiglass. We've already purchased air purifiers. So those one-time expenses will not reoccur. We're hopeful that the estimates we've put on putting air conditioning in 2 of our school buildings that currently do not materialize to the point that we've gotten some ballpark figures. Those are being spec'd out now. So that could realize some savings, or it could possibly be higher than anticipated. We're trying to build buffers. But I do think the $2.4 million will be a reasonable amount, and I think it'll be enough to provide teachers and those building administrators that were on the front lines during the height of the pandemic, show of gratitude that they deserve.
What's the scope of the height of pandemic? Like, what's the date from this date to what date?
Well, we haven't finalized the time frame, but there are some indications that, you know, it'll be a certain period of time. Those people still need to be with us, unfortunately. And there could be some other stipulations as, you know, again, if they took a 5-month leave of absence, they would not receive that, but we want teachers that were here.
Is it physically in the building?
Physically in the building. Everyone was physically in the building, except those that took maybe a leave of absence, which was very few and far between. And then look at some other key factors, you know, that are still committed to the Bridgeport Public Schools. So we could hash out those specifics, but just really allocating the money to know that we've taken the step to put that aside and provide our teachers and our frontline administrators.
Is that all you have, Mrs.?
I mean, if the fine details hasn't been hashed out, I suppose it's fine. Ms. Siegel, can you scroll down again to the full section F?
Yes.
Thank you.
This is the state law, CFR 200.430, which applies to all types of incentive compensation, not solely to compensation that may be given with funding from the ESO grant.
I mean, I'll say for the record, I'll be interested to see what the standards are, because it does say efficient performance. And if we're going to put it toward a not applicable period, how those measurements are going to be. Safety awards, that terminology, what that will necessarily mean as far as for it. But as long as it's going to be vetted out with a clear plan and for a specified period, and we know that if someone's no longer part of the Bridgeport schools, then they won't be considered. I think if we can completely vet it out with the proper procedures, fine.
Yeah, I mean, we opened schools. Teachers were on the front lines in classrooms with in-person learning from the beginning of last school year till the end of last school year, and continue to be. You know, I can't think of anybody that was on the front lines more than a classroom teacher or a school psychologist who had to work one-on-one in a closed office. You know, we did have just a lot of folks that pitched in. I know they weren't, you know, always that comfortable given the situation, but, you know, we all pulled together, and I think it should be recognized. And we're not talking about, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars here, but just a small token for probably the most underpaid school staff in the state. I mean, let's be realistic.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. I want to say this very clear, and I hope nobody interrupt me, that I know this was coming. I will say thank you for all of you over here, and thank you for all your hard work you guys do, and you deserve more that you have. I know this money is here, and we're talking about things positive, things negative. Knowing I'm already searching, I do my homework the way it's supposed to be as a board member, and I know this coming from months back, and sometimes you guys made me confused, but I know, and I want to be clear for the record, that whatever money they sent for all these employees, they deserve it. I don't want to come and excuse it. They use it for something else when it's not. Mr. Chair, I know you are the financial, Mr. Testani. I know you're in charge for Bridgeport School, but I hope you understand it very clear that this money, they deserve it. I don't want they say, oh, they use it for this, they use it for that. No, it's not money. It's not coming money for the kids. It's something money very separate, and that is because they work hard. When sometimes, as I was home, these people risking their life, risking the life, family, and everyone. And I will stand with them and fight with them to be sure they receive the money they're supposed to be, because they work very hard for us. They very hard. And I'm going to repeat it. And now you guys really know I'm always say this. I'm an elected official not because of board member or Mr. Testani. I'm an elected official because the community vote for me. The community, they know I'm here for them. They ask questions. Me, mandatory, I have to answer them. So I want you to let you know very clear, they deserve this money. I hope they don't come excuses and come to say, no, we use it for this, because I will not accept it. I will stay behind them to fight. They deserve what they need to do because they work hard. There was the first person from the line, and we got so many things sad. They was sick, some passed away, they lost family like I do. But we have to understand, without them, our kids would never get education. I just want to say that for the record. Thank you.
Mr. Macaron.
I withdraw, no, that's fine. Mr. Benahan just said what I would want to say. Thank you.
Ms. Castillo.
I'm not prepared. I'm not ready right now to speak on this. Can I ask, is this going to be potentially voted on tonight to be discussed at the Board of Ed meeting or passed on to the Board of Ed?
It has to.
Yes, it's going to go before the full board, and I anticipate after assuming it passes that the MOU will also have to come before us
Yes.
for approval. And
Right, okay.
I think that's it. Is there anything
Okay,
else you
well,
have?
I would like the record to show that I agree. I think it's pretty unanimous. I don't think there's anyone on this board that does not feel that the staff and teachers and administrators in our school district do not deserve premium pay or any level of bonus pay for their very good work during the pandemic in particular. So I just wanted the record to show that I do feel that way. I don't want to comment further until it's brought forth before the board. Thank you.
All right, I got a couple of final questions. How many employees are we talking about between the BEA and CEA that's going to be covered under this 2.5?
Maximum, maybe 1,600. But I think just to put it in a easier perspective, this breaks down to maybe $125 a kid. I think every family and every child in the district would agree that if they could give their teacher $125 for what they've done, they would agree that that's pretty cheap money.
Okay, another question.
Why was it broken down per kid? If it's 2.4 million and you have...
Because we're saying if we're taking it away from kids, we're taking $125 per kid, because there's over 19,000 kids that were impacted. So really it's a thank you from that the kids and their families can't give, but I think we should be able to give. Like I said, I asked a lot of these folks over the last year plus. It's been difficult, and again, they rise to the occasion every time, and I wish I could give them more. I mean, it's just not possible. We've been advocating as recently as 2 days ago to the governor of the state of Connecticut. We cannot continue to shortchange teachers in our district. Can't continue to shortchange teachers in general. If we're going to, invest in the future, this is where we invest our money, not in some of the things that we've spent money on frivolously, but this is where we build upon a community, is in education.
Any other questions?
I just want to make sure my math is right. And Ms. Siegel, you could feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. 2.4 million for potentially how many employees?
Between the teachers and those qualified,
Yeah.
and maximum, it would be about 1,600 because the city of Bridgeport would pick up the tab on the non-certified folks, but we want to stay consistent. Again, there may be some that don't qualify simply because they weren't here of the current staff. They didn't stay, they didn't finish the year, they took a leave of absence. So if the money doesn't equal 2.4 million, it goes back into the plan.
Okay, so in a perfect world, if it was everybody, it would be a $15,000.
$1,500.
1,500.
Correct.
That's it?
Want to give them more? It's-
Yeah. It's okay.
Oh, no, that's why I said, correct me if I'm wrong with my
Yeah,
math.
that's 50, yes, 51.
That's-
Mr. Testani, do you have any other questions? All right, has any other districts in Connecticut approved ESSER funding, grants?
The only one that I'm aware of is Stanford, and they approved $500, which,
500.
yeah, that's
And
after taxes. I guess they can go out for a nice.
how much more is their budget than ours?
Well, I don't think they received as much, I'm not sure, but I don't think they received quite as much federal relief, but they're also much higher paid individuals than Stanford.
Okay.
You came in till.
Did they finally approve it? I know they,
Do we know their dollar?
I can find out tomorrow from Brian, the superintendent. I can call him tonight.
Because it's not really a good look. There's no reflection on the teachers and the deservability of anything. But when we cry poverty and we spend this kind of money and we're spending more than more affluent towns, it doesn't look good for the advocacy portion when we're advocating down the line for more funding, more funding, more funding. I'm not saying, I know these are hard conversations, but I just want to put it out there that money is limited. We're extremely poverty-stricken, underfunded school district. And I don't know. But at this point, I will entertain a motion to move this to the, you ready to move it to the full board? You want to keep talking? You ready? No, you can.
Mr. Chair, I just want to know if it's possible, with your permission and with everybody respect and good communication, we can open the floor so we have president here for the union, stuff like that. They can maybe they can give you some 1 or 2 second comments because I respect and you can answer me because I respect they take the time to be here and I appreciate that and I respect that. Like we all do, we have family, we have back, take care of family. So I just want to know if it is possible with your permission.
Absolutely not. The time for us to talk would be between Mr. Testani and the unions at the bargaining table when we're working out the kinks of this thing. Should it pass? I'm assuming it's going to pass because I'm leaning that way against my fiscal restraint. So at this point, I'll entertain a motion. Hold on, I got to bring back up the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to redirect $2.4 million from ESSER funding in order to provide the BEA and the CEA and bargaining.
BEA and BCAS.
BEA and BCAS with, what you call it? ESSER funding for prior service during the pandemic.
So move. Second.
Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Mr. Testani, can you see that this also gets on the agenda, please?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We adjourn.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.